Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Are we ready to start?
Hi, Julia and everyone. I think we can wait for 1 more minute so that more participants can join.
Sure, no problem. Just let me know when you're ready, Leanne.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. What about while waiting for order to join? We can unmute ourselves and have a quick introduce about each other. Feel free to turn on camera also if you want to have a direct conversation with Julia. Julia, maybe you can start first.
Yeah, okay. So I'm Professor Julia Gamester. I'm the Dean of the School of Communication Design. My background is actually fashion, but I've also always had a passion for drawing and painting, something which I focused on more over probably the last 6 or 7 years when I went off on a painting holiday in Spain and then a couple of workshops and got really hooked. I work in different media, but watercolor, I guess, I find it very meditative. And it's what's lovely about watercolor is you can't ever really predict what it's going to do. So every time you do something with it, it's slightly different, and we'll express a bit of that today. My take on painting is I'm not trying to do something photorealistic. If I want to do that, I'll take a photograph. What I'm trying to do is to capture the essence of what I'm looking at or what I'm using as a reference and bring my own personality into it. Yeah, so this is something that I do as a hobby. I'm in my home studio at the moment. I have been over the lockdown doing Sunday afternoon watercolor shops for people as a thing to keep them grounded and something to do whilst we were all stuck in our homes. Something I really enjoy doing. So I don't put myself out there as an expert or up with the best of the best, but I think I do have a little bit of knowledge that I will enjoy sharing with you today. Okay, so who would like to say hello next? Don't be shy, we won't eat you. No? Anybody from Ho Chi Minh City? You can type in the chat if you don't want to speak. Okay, I think everybody's feeling a bit shy today.
Yeah, a little bit. Maybe need more time. Okay, I think we can start the workshop now.
Okay, and just so you all know, we will be recording this so that if you want to look back on anything that you can. If during the demonstration you have any questions, then please type them in the chat and one of our team will try and answer them for you, or will ask me so that I can answer them for you. Okay, so you won't see me for the rest of this because I'm going to be focusing on the work, which is what you want to look at and not my face. So I'm just going to flip the webcam down now and hopefully you'll be able to see my sketchbook. Okay, so if we can just flick to the next slide, please, Leanne. So this workshop is part of the Big Draw. For those of you who don't know, the Big Draw is a charity that promotes the use of drawing as a way of thinking and communicating across all different boundaries. It's been going very many years in the UK. It's now an international event, and this year we've partnered with them to be part of our festival. So we're really pleased to be part of the Big Draw. Okay, so this is what we're going to do today. First of all, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Lotus Flower, which is the subject of our workshop today, and absolutely one of my favourite flowers. We'll talk a bit about that. We're going to talk a little bit about the basics of watercolour, I'm sure we've got some absolute beginners today and some more advanced people. That doesn't matter. This is all about having fun. Making mistakes is part of learning, and I do it all the time, and I'll probably make some today, so don't worry too much. The materials, they are quite important, I think, with watercolour, more so than, sorry, could we flip back one? The materials are very important. So I'm going to do a quick demo on stretching paper, how to transfer your sketch, and then we'll go through some tips and techniques, and then we'll have a go at the separate bits of the flower. Now, in 2 hours, I don't expect that we will get to a finished piece, but I hope that I'll be able to show you all the techniques so that you can go away and do that in your own time. Okay. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so the lotus flower. Let's just discuss a little bit about it and understand what we're painting. I always think it's good to understand your subject. It gives you insights and it helps you to decide what you want to do with it when you're creating the painting. And I tend to try and use my own photographs, or my husband takes lots of photographs, but you can't always get the right photo to work from. And one of the photos we're using today, I didn't have a very good picture of a seed head, so I got that from Unsplash. References are at the end. What's really important, though, when you're using other people's work as references, you must have permission. Otherwise, you can't do anything with it. You can't print it on a postcard or put it on your website because you'll be in breach of copyright. So Unsplash, you're allowed to use the images as long as you attribute the person who put the photograph up there. So it's a great resource. Okay, next slide, please. So the Latin name of the lotus flower, Nelumbo nucifera. Today we're going to be looking at a pink one, but they come in lots of different colours, and the different colours have different meanings. It represents purity, rebirth, and enlightenment, and this is because every evening it kind of dies down and then is reborn in the morning as a, opens up again. And it goes way, way back, the representations of the lotus flower you'll find in religions like Buddhism, Hinduism, and all the way back to ancient Egypt. It was venerated even then. So it grows in the muddiest, grubbiest, dirty water, but yet it's the most beautiful flower. And I think that's kind of what fascinates me, is that something so beautiful can come out of muck. And it seeds, they found seeds like thousands of years old and they still germinate, which is absolutely incredible. So it's very tenacious. It has survived thousands of years. And every bit of it can be used. We can make the petals into tea. We can eat the roots, and the stems can be used for the most glorious silk, which is really expensive. I've put a link there for you if you want to see how they get silk out of lotus. It's incredible. Obviously, last night I was eating lotus root fried with sesame seed, absolutely delicious. You can eat the seeds. And of course, it's just a beautiful flower to have in your home as well. So it was voted as the national flower of Vietnam, and you'll see it represented all over. So this is on the slide, you'll see that's a stamp, a vintage stamp. And the Bitexo building, interestingly, was based on a lotus. That was the original inspiration for it. So it's very much embedded into the culture of Vietnam. Okay, next page, please. Right, so we're going to talk a little bit about watercolor and what makes it different. It's basically, it's transparent, and we get depth of color by building up layers. And it's usually if we want white, we will leave the paper white to represent that. But I'm not a traditionalist. Traditionalists would never add white to watercolor, but I think if you need it, you add it. It's fine. The minute you add white, though, you're taking it into opaque rather than transparent. So the quality of the paint is important, and it doesn't mean you always have to buy the best quality, but be aware of the qualities of the paint that you've got. So cheaper student paints are fine. But you won't always get very intense colours. They come in pans and they come in tubes. So this is a palette of pans. actually, on this side, they're Schmick, which is one brand. And on the other side, I just got sent from the UK some Winsor and Newton professional colours. And these are really high quality, very expensive. But you'll see this opera pink is something that I just couldn't replicate anywhere else. And then I have these ones. These are also Winsor Newton, but these ones are Japanese watercolours. And I'm using these today because I particularly like the tones and shades that they have. And then you also can get them in tubes. So you can have, this is ready mixed, squeezed out, it's already liquid. Okay. And you can also get watercolor inks, and these are a super duper fabulously expensive set of watercolor pencils, which come in a massive range of colors. And with these, you can put your color down as crayon, and then add some water to turn it into a watercolor. These are very handy for when you're traveling and you don't have lots of paints. Again, you don't have to buy a whole expensive set. One or two of your favorite colors can be useful. Okay, and you can also get watercolor inks. These are my favorite brand. You can find them here if you shop around a bit. I bought quite a lot of these here and some from the UK, Ecoline. But these give you really intense colors. The problem is they're not that fast, light fast. So for something you're going to hang on a wall, not so good, because the UV light will fade them. But if you're doing an illustration that's going to be digitalized, not a problem. Right, so we get depth of color also by the amount of water that we add. So if I have a lot of paint, I'll get a very deep color. I hope you can you see that? You'll get a very deep color. If I then clean the paint out of my brush and just use water, we can drag it out to get a much lighter color. Okay, and that it gives us a lot of flexibility, because it means we can also blend colors together. We can also lift color off. So if you make a mistake or you've got too much color, just take a clean brush and water and a paper towel, and you can almost make it disappear. Okay. So while it's still wet, it's very, very versatile. Okay. Okay. So we'll talk about paper a little bit more when we get to the materials, but the paper is also important. You get different qualities of paper, and there are different techniques. So the first technique is what we call wet on wet, which is literally, we take some water, we make the paper wet, we take some color, and we can drop it in. And you'll see what happens with this is that the color, I hope you can see all right, I've not got a very good view on this screen here. So the color, tell me if you can't see, people, you can just bleed it in. And this is quite nice for blending, where you want colors to just run into each other. And it will just kind of go where it wants to go. You can play with it a little bit, but it's quite a nice way of kind of just blending colors together. So that's wet on wet. And wet on dry is exactly what it says. So we take some wet paint and we apply it directly to dry paper. So it gives you a very different effect. And if you want really detailed work with lots of detail, then using wet on dry is probably easier than wet on wet, which is much more about free and loose effects. But you can use them together. You can use both within the same painting. Here I used wet on wet for the laying down the colour of the petals, and then I let it dry, and then I added some green with a little bit more detail into the bottom there. Okay. And you can add other media to it. You can add ink, you can add pastel, you can add gouache, you can add anything that you want if you know, to get the effect that you want. And for me, that's the beauty of art, is it, you know, you just play around and you experiment and you find you have happy accidents and sometimes not so happy accidents. And again, you know, we can dab things out to, if it's too intense, we can dab it out and we can go back in and drop in a little bit of a different colour. A little bit peachy. And I can just add in some water, drop of water, and it will expand somewhat. With wet on wet, the paint will only go where you've already wet the paper, so that's quite a nice way of controlling what you're doing as well. You drop the paint in, it will spread to the edges of where the colour is, the water is, and no further. Couple of things: do ever leave your paintbrushes standing in water. You will ruin them. Okay. You don't have to buy expensive brushes, but the more expensive they are, the more you want to take care of them. Lots of water. My preference, instead of one big tub of water, I have lots of these little jars. My yogurt comes in them. I have this handmade yogurt, which is really lovely, from Cat's Kitchen, if you want to look her up on Facebook. And they come in these lovely jars that have lids, and I like them because you can put them together. I can have 6 or 8. I can use one for blues and greens, one for pinks, keep one clean. I don't have to keep changing my water. When your water starts to get muddy, your colours will get muddy. So keep your water clean and change it often. Okay. Real purists use distilled water if you want your work to last for 100 years. I don't go that far. Mine comes out of the tap. And the other thing is remembering to take the paint to the water, not the water to the paint. So I like this. It's a little dropper. I can't remember where I got it. I found it somewhere. But it allows me to drop clean water. You can do that with a brush. And then damp brush, get a bit of the paint and mix it in. Want a bit more water, a bit more water. So mix the paint here, not on your pan, because you'll ruin your pan. You'll get, I mean, you can clean it up afterwards. I do it sometimes, make a mess. If you were to take your blue brush now and put it onto there, you'll end up messing up your nice clean red. Whereas if I take another brush and add the blue, I can mix my paint and make a more purpley colour without messing up my pan. So take the paint to the water is a better option. And you don't have to completely clean your palette at the end, because even if your watercolour dries up, you can reactivate it. So if you put quite a lot on a palette like I have here earlier, you can see these are from a tube. They've dried up on here, but I've left them because I can reactivate them with water now. Okay. Any questions before we move on? No questions? Okay, next slide, please. Right, so materials, we've talked about the pans and the paints and the tubes and the quality. But sometimes you don't want the best quality. Sometimes you want a really faded vintage effect and you don't want too much pigment in the watercolour. So then you can use a cheap watercolour, it doesn't matter. It's when you want a really nice pigment, then you have to pay a bit more when you want lots of pigment. Now, paintbrushes, again, different qualities, different prices. A good brush, you want to make sure if it's a round brush, it should have a nice point on the end. I'm getting covered in red. These are this one is a Phoenix Chinese brush, not very expensive, but it's nice and fine. It has a lovely point. Okay. This one is one of my most expensive brushes. This is a Kolinsky sable. It comes from the tail hairs of a sable, which is a rodent. These are ethically sourced, and I'm very particular about that. From Rosemary's Brushes, which is in the UK. They will deliver to Vietnam, but obviously you pay the import duty. But these are the best quality brushes I've ever found. And you don't need to spend a lot of money right away, but if you, like me, really get into it, then it's worth investing in 1 or 2 really good brushes. So those are round brushes, but there's different shapes. This is obviously a square one, different sizes. This is called a rigger, so called because it was used for painting the rigging in ships. And these are really good if you're doing flowers for long, thin stems. You can see it makes a really nice long, thin line. And then we have brushes like this, which are in a kind of a fan shape. These are good for feathers and fur and anything you want to kind of fluffy edge. And then we have different ones like this, which have a shaped edge. These I find good for leaves and petals. Okay, but you don't need a huge amount of brushes to start with either. You can just start with 1 or 2 basics. And I find if you're starting off, the round ones are the most versatile. Okay, so yeah, so I put some links in there for you as well. If you're vegan and you don't want to use animal hair, there are good synthetic brushes on the market, and I've put a link there to a site where you can find out about those as well. Okay, next page, please. Right, so paper, let's talk paper, because actually, no matter how good the quality of your paint or your brush is, you really need good paper. My suggestion would be, you can get cold press paper. Cold press is like this, and I don't know if you can see, it has a slight texture on the surface. It's not very rough, but it has a slight texture. Hot press is very smooth. Hot press I find is okay for pencil work. I don't particularly like it so much for watercolor because the surface lifts off very quickly. Whereas this cold press paper takes a lot of bashing and a lot of water. And I like to use a lot of water in some of my work. And this is 300 grams. I would suggest you never use anything less than 200 and preferably 300. It just gives you that flexibility, and it will stand up to a lot more than a thin paper. The minute you put watercolor onto a thin paper, it will just crinkle up. Okay. Other useful things that you can, and it comes in sheets. This is a sketchbook, by the way. This is my favorite company. Also very expensive. I tend to be a bit extravagant. You can see here I've made a chart at the front of my different colors I have in watercolor. This is by Etcher. It's called the Perfect Sketchbook, and it absolutely is. It opens flat. It's high quality watercolor paper. But you can get much cheaper nice sketchbooks. You can also get sheets you can cut down and watercolor blocks. This one is, again, it's 100% cotton. And this is really important because there's different types of paper. And if you want good quality and a nice finish that's going to stand up to taking a lot of water and everything, you want 100% cotton. You can see this is 300 grams. It's acid free, which is important because otherwise your paints will discolor over time. And this is cold pressed. Okay. Now on a block, it's already sealed all the way round. So when you start painting it, it will bubble a bit, but it will flatten back out because it's sealed. And they usually have just a little bit where you can put something in to, I use this. Once you've finished and it's dried, you can put that in and prise it off the block. It saves you a lot of time, and particularly if you hate stretching paper, which isn't my favourite thing to do, but is what we're going to move on to in a second. So it doesn't need to be, you know, that there are very expensive craft papers as well. Doesn't need to be the most expensive paper to start off with. Scrap paper for testing your colours is a sketchbook, or this is a little tiny watercolour block I got. I use this for testing colours on. Important, a palette or a plate. A plate is just as good. Ceramic plate or plastic plate will do, but the palettes have little sections that stops the colours getting into each other. They're not expensive. I like these little ones as well because I can use these for different colour groups. I think these were about 20,000 for 2. Sponge is for the stretching the paper, so we'll come to that in a second. And an eraser can be useful. I like these. These are the Artist Malleable razors, so that you can pull a bit off. It's a bit like glue tack, and it's really good for lifting off any excess pencil you end up with. Okay. Pencils are good to have, HB and 2B, especially if you're tracing. Okay, so this is Fashion RMIT pencil. That's an HB. It's harder. This is a 4B. That's a 2B. Oh, that's a 4B as well. Okay. So soft pencil, we'll see in a minute. Essential, especially if you're doing a lot on wet on wet, and you don't want to have to wait for things to dry, a hairdryer. Just an ordinary hairdryer. Very, very useful. And my other secret weapon, cotton wool buds. These are the tiny ones I get from Circle K, really, really little. Very useful for dotting out. You want to lift out just a very small area. You can see there the colour is coming off onto the bud. Okay. And then bigger ones, they're useful. And always have some kitchen paper, kitchen towel or tissue paper for blotting the excess water or lifting out colour where you've got too much. Keep some of that next to you when you're working. Okay. Okay. And then another type of sponge, if I've got one on my desk, I don't think I have. For getting textures, you can use a natural sea sponge. Can't just see one at the moment. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're just going to go into how to stretch paper. Somebody's saying they can't hear me clearly. And everybody else? Everybody else hear me okay?
I'm hearing you okay.
Okay, all right, good. I'll carry on then. Okay, so stretching paper. I'm going to lose my sketchbook for a minute. Every artist has their own preferred method of doing this, and there's different ways of doing it. You can soak it in the bathtub or a tray of water. You can stick it down with masking tape if you can't get gum tape. So this is the gum tape I use. It's paper, and it's not sticky when it's dry. You can order this through Lazada. I haven't been able to find it in the shop here, but they bring it in. This is a sheet of my 300 gram paper, and you should be able to feel that one side is rougher than the other. The rough side is the right side. Okay. So I'm going to put that down. I'm going to use a big, you can use a sponge if you want, or a big brush, clean water, or you can use a spray, and we're just going to wet the paper. Now what we're doing here is we're letting the water soak in to the fibres and letting them relax, so that when they tighten up again, when they dry, they won't wrinkle. So you've got the green there. Make sure your brush is clean. That's my right side. And then I'm going to turn it over, and I'm going to do the back. Plenty of water, but don't scrub at the paper because you'll lift off the size, which finishes the paper and helps it to helps the watercolor pigment to attach. So I'm just doing it quite lightly, but plenty of water. Okay. Now, if you can't get gum tape, you want to do it with masking tape. Tape the paper down first because you won't be able to get the masking tape to stick if the paper is wet. And then just wet the right side. So that's my right side. Okay. Now that it's wet, just smooth it down very gently. Make sure your hands are clean. Make sure it's lying flat. It's open from the two. And then very importantly, move your paper out of the way while you do the next step. I've already cut some strips of gum tape. Don't gum your tape over the paper, because if any of the glue comes off onto the paper where you want to paint, you won't be able to paint over it, and it will be really annoying. So here what I'm going to do is I've got the tape, I've got a wet sponge, and I'm just going to draw the sponge down the tape, like so. Bring my paper back, and then place it on the board. Any board that is fairly firm will do. This is just a hardboard drawing board. You can use acrylic as well. And I'm going to do the same. You've got the shorter piece for the top. Same thing, just rub that down there. And then make sure it's well and truly stuck. You want to get a good edge of the paper. If you put it right on the edge, it won't work. So I usually put it about probably a centimetre and a half in. Let's just do the next one. Just make sure your paper stays flat while you're doing this. You see it? It will start to wrinkle as it dries, but don't worry. That's part of the process. And then my last piece. Seem to have lost of it. Okay. Last piece. Okay. So what will happen now? This is going to wrinkle up a bit. But as it dries out, because the paper can't move because I've stuck it down, it will flatten out again. So when we put lots of water on there to work with the image, the paper will swell up again because it will soak up the water, but then it will, when it dries, it will flatten out. Now, I can feel my fingers are sticky. I don't want to get that gum on anything. So I'm going to put this on one side. I'm just going to wash my hands there with me a second. And once your paper is dry, you can transfer your image. So I'm just going to show you how to do that next. So next slide, please. Try and keep your workspace clean. The last thing you want to do is get a big blob of colour you don't want, and it's happened to me many times. Okay, so here you can see I stretched this earlier. And I've already transferred my design onto this so I can then start to paint. But I'm just going to show you how to do the transfer. So I'm going to use my watercolour block so I don't have to stretch any of the paper. I've given you a template in the pack. Now I printed it out a bit bigger because I wanted to work a bit bigger so you can see what I'm doing. And I just resized the image, made it bigger, and then taped it together. And then I used some greaseproof paper. You can use tracing paper, but this is literally greaseproof paper for cooking with. And I traced over the top of it again. Okay. Then we turn the greaseproof paper over to the back, and we make sure we've gone across all of the lines that we want to draw in. Very loosely. This is a soft pencil, and I'm just going over the back of my tracing, making sure that I've covered. I've already used this. You can use this several times, by the way. Then I'm going to turn it over onto my paper and make sure it's positioned where I want it with a little bit around the edge. Okay. And then, so it doesn't move whilst I'm tracing, because I don't want that to happen. I'm just going to stick it down with a bit of masking tape. This is masking tape. Get it at any good stationers. And it's kind of tacky, it sticks things down, but then you can easily take it up again. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is take my harder HB pencil and I'm going to trace around the image. There's quite a lot to do here, so I'm not going to do the whole thing. I'm just going to do the top and then show you what happens. Now, the other thing that you can do is, if you've got your sheet of paper and your original image, you can paste your image onto the window on a sunny day with the sun coming through, paste your sheet of paper over the top, transfer your image and then stretch it later. And that's what I did with the earlier one. Or if you happen to have access to a light box, you can also use a light box. And I'll show you my light box in a minute. And I'm doing this quite loosely. We want to get, you know, the main lines here. There's discussion around tracing. Should you trace? Should you not trace? Personally, I do both. Sometimes when it's a very complex subject and I haven't got a lot of time, like in this demo, I will trace just to give myself some guidelines. Sometimes I will just go freehand and draw freehand or draw even with the paintbrush. If you're not confident in drawing or you're new to it, then tracing is absolutely fine. And if anybody tells you you shouldn't do it, tell them the old masters did it. They used to use something called a camera obscura. It's how they learnt to draw perspective. And if it's good enough for the old masters, it's good enough for us. And anyway, the tracing isn't what makes the painting. A line is a line. It's what you do with the paint. And you can give 25 people the same tracing, they will come up with 25 completely different images. Right, so I'm just going to lift this off so you can see, hopefully, that the image is starting to transfer. Can you see that? It's quite difficult on here, it's quite faint. But the image transfers onto the paper. I'll finish that later so I don't ruin this piece of paper. Okay, and then as I said, this is what you will end up with, is a tracing template that you can work to. So what we're going to do next, I'm going back to my sketchbook. Any questions about the tracing? Transferring the sketch? Sketchbook now. Things. Okay, any questions? No? Everyone still hear me okay? See everything okay? All right, so now we're going to start painting. So if we go to the next page, please. Oh yeah, so this is just some examples. So this is a watercolor I did using the wet on dry technique. And that was because it's very detailed and I wanted this very controlled look. some mushrooms. Next one, you'll see completely different. So that first painting is about A4 size. This one is 2 meters by 1 meter. It's an Alstroemer, and this was done with inks, watercolor inks. And that was done with the wet on wet technique. So just painting the shape of the flower generally, and then dropping the inks in to get the different shades and colors. So you can see with watercolor, you can get very, very different outcomes depending on how you use it. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to start with the flower and the buds. And this is a photo my husband took. What's useful to do here, another tip, is with digital images, what's great is you can really zoom into them to see the detail. So that can be quite useful. And the first thing we want to do is to work out where the light and shade are, because you want to leave the light as it is, and then get the darker bits later. So the way that I tend to work normally is to work from the lighter to the darker, but not always. It depends on what we're trying to do. So we're just going to have a play around first on some spare paper before you go to your main thing to get the colours and to get the technique right. Now, you may not be able to get the exact colour, and the thing that you sometimes feel disappointed about with painting is when you're using a digital image, the colours look super vibrant, and that's because you've got light coming through them. So we're looking here at an RGB, red, green and blue image that is made by combining pixels with the light coming through. So it looks very luminescent. But when we do things on paper, we're usually mixing cyan, magenta, black, yellow, and the light isn't coming through. So you will get a different kind of colour. So that's something to just be aware of. But the main thing is your brain recognises things by the shape and the shading, the tone, the light and the dark. So if you can't get the exact pink or the exact green, it really doesn't matter, because our brains have a very short memory for colour, and as long as it looks convincing, your brain will buy that as being okay. So what we need to do is just choose the pinks or the colours that we want to use, and then just make sure we get the tones and the shades in the right place. So let's just first of all do a couple of practice techniques. So I've got my scrap paper here, and I'm just going to take my paintbrushes. I've got 3 different sizes here, quite a fine one and a thicker one. I'm going to start with the thicker one, and we're going to do a bit of wet on wet. So I'm just going to try a couple of the shapes of the, I've only got pink in that brush, doesn't help. Okay, let's get rid of that. Okay. Just make sure I've got a clean brush. Right, so I'm just going to do the shape that I want for the petal. I'm just going to draw it in water. Then I'm going to take my thinner brush, and I'm going to use a bit of colour. And I think I'm going to use, this is one of the Japanese colours that I had. I have to put it on here. See, it's a pinky red, not quite exactly the same pink as there, but it's a nice pink. So I'm going to get my palette here. Water. And there. Just a tiny bit to wet it and then bring it to here. And we can just check how deep we want the colour. To start off with, I want it quite light. And I'm just going to let it flow into here. And the thing about the lotus flower is it's got more colour kind of at the top than the bottom. And then another trick, if you want to get a good ombre shading, people tend to think they have to do this. They have the colour here, and then they think they have to put the water and drag the colour that way. You won't get the ombre shading you want if you do that, okay? The best way, start with a bit of deeper colour up here. You can see it's bleeding in. And take a brush of water towards it this way and blend it that way, and you will get a much more subtle effect than if you try and drag the colour down. So here, painting like this, and keeping it quite light at the bottom. And I'm going to a deeper colour at the top. Okay. If I want it more pinky, then I can use a pink, or mix your own pink with some red and white, and just drop that pinky colour in there as well. Get that through. Now, the petal I'm looking at also has some shadow, and for that I'm going to use a tiny bit of blue, an ultra blue, that's purple. Blue, and just bring that in to create the effect of a bit of shading. Use blue, you can use purple, you can use grey, but basically we just want to show that it goes a bit cooler on that bottom edge, get a little bit of dynamic. And I just want to make that point at the top a little bit more pronounced. So that's wet on wet. Okay, we can let that dry, or we can dry it with a hairdryer. Now, when you're using the hairdryer, don't get it too close to the paper. You want to dry it off, but you don't want to scorch the paper or your pigment. You don't want it to get too hot. Okay. And to test if something's dry, never use the tips of your fingers because they'll be greasy. Use the back of your hand. Okay, so that's still wet. And then you can add, if you want to start building the colour a bit more intensely, then you can just add another layer of colour, put a bit more deep pink in the top here, really make that end punchy and vivid. A lot of people think watercolours are kind of a little bit pastel-y and weak and feeble looking. They don't have to be. They can actually be very, very vivid. And some of the examples that I've got to show you at the end will show you how some artists really, really do that. And I'm just adding in water here, blending it in. And I'm just going to put a tiny bit more of that purpley blue. Get a little bit more depth going on down here. A little bit more shadow. So when I'm creating shadow, never use black. Shadows are not black. And I very, very, very rarely use black in any of my work. Sometimes when I've got a black cat or a black dog, because black is very rarely black, totally black. It's usually shades of grey or blue or very dark purple. So here again, I'm just adding a little bit of a sense that the flower is three-dimensional. The petal is three-dimensional. This bit's in the shade of it there. Is the side of the petal. And this is where a cotton wool grid can be useful, because if you want to just lift a little bit of colour out, you can do that. Now this is cheaper watercolour paper, so what you can see is already we've got little bits of the paper lifting and we're getting kind of felty look. And that's what you want to avoid. If you start to get that, dry your paper again. Keep it dry. Okay, so that's one technique. That's the wet on wet. And then I'm just going to do another one, which is going to be wet on dry. So I'm just going to very quickly again create the sensing of the leaf here, the petal. And this time I'm starting paint on my brush. Again, just test the intensity. That's too strong. Got more water. So the way we get different shades is by adding different quantities of water. And you can still have, I've got a bit of purple in my brush there. This is why it's very important. Test your colour every time before you put it on. Okay, so now I'm going to just, I'm going to do this using wet on dry. And I'm going to leave some bits very light.
Zoom xong cô vào theo cái link đấy là được. Cô cài trên điện thoại.
Someone have a question? And here I'm taking some clean water, nothing on the brush but water, and I'm just working into, going up into the colour, not dragging it down, pushing up to get that blend. We don't want a hard line, we want it to look as if it's blending into itself. Okay. And if I've got too much colour, if I want to keep the area a little bit lighter, again, I can take some paper and just go in and have it out a bit. And then take some more water and blend it back in again. This way you have a little bit more control. And while it's still damp, I'm dropping in a bit of that opera pink, which is my favourite colour at the moment. And then dragging up to just blend it in. Now, some of the petals, the ones at the bottom of the, can we go to the next slide? So we've got the picture up. Thank you. Okay, so the ones at the bottom of the water lily you'll see are slightly more peachy looking. They're a little bit in the shade and there's a touch of yellow in there. So what I'm now going to do is take a little bit of yellow. Make it very watery. So I don't want it to overpower, just test it. And I'm going to add in a little bit of yellow to get a peachy colour. And again, if you think it's too strong, you can always dab a bit out, put your light areas back in. It's always easier to add more colour later than it is to try and remove it if you put too much in. And so that's why we start with, you know, kind of quite pale and going deeper. I'm just putting a bit of shadow in the bottom there, a bit of purple. Okay. So I'm not specifically trying to replicate any particular leaf here, I'm just showing you technique. Create a bit of an edge there. So 2 different techniques, 2 very different looking leaves. This petal looks more controlled. The one I did the wet on dry, and the wet on wet one is a lot looser. Okay, and as I said, you can combine the 2, so you can, once this is dried, you can go back in there, and let's say you want to add some veins in, because there are some veins in the flower. Then I can go back in and just add a bit of detail. Like so, using a thin brush. And if I don't want it quite so hard, just then blend it in a bit again with some water. And if you look closely, there are some kind of ribs in the leaf. Okay, so now I've just put some little bits of detail into there to give it sense. And the other thing is, when you're trying to give a sense of shape and 3-dimensionality, it's important to draw your paint and use your brush in the direction you want the eye to follow. So if you want something to look as if it's curling round, then use the brush the same way, where you want it to curl. Yeah? If you do straight lines and you want it to look as if it's curled, it won't look as if it's curling. And also, blending out your colour in the direction that you want to show will give it much more of a sense of 3-dimensionality. I think the way that you want the eye to feel that the shape is going, it will give you much more of a sense of 3D. And don't be afraid to use, quite strong contrast. So here, we can go for a very, very, very deep pink. And then come back in. Okay. Right, so that's painting the petals. Now we're going to do the bud. The bud is slightly different because the bud goes from green to pink. So we're going to be blending 2 colours. So just going to remove this block. A ruler will do if you don't have, this is a little special tool, but a ruler will do. And I'm going to use the back of this because it's just the testing. Okay, so again, 2 methods. The first one, I'm just going to paint with water roughly the shape that I want for the bud. So. And then, again, I'm going to just take some pinky colour and starting at the top, I'm just going to bleed that in and let it kind of go where it wants to go. About 2/3 of the way down. Okay. Then while it's still wet, I'm going to get some green. This green is called emerald. I quite like it, or this is yellowy green. I might mix a bit of both. And I'm just going to drop some green in there. And again, you can see it's quite pale, not a lot of colour to start with. We just want it to blend in. It's not quite strong enough. Let's add a bit more. It's too much. We can remove it. And this is where a high hairdryer is really handy. And I'm just going to add a dab of slightly deeper green at the bottom. And what you'll find is when your colours dry, they dry paler anyway than when you're wet. Now be careful here. Don't get too close or you'll push the colour where you don't want it. So I'm holding the hairdryer quite a distance from the paper. Okay, so it's now, you can test it with the back of my hand, it's dry. Right. And then I can start to add some detail with my fine brush. Using everything. Okay. I'm going to go for a slightly darker, it's too dark. Some water in it. And then I'm going to put in these bits that are coming up from the bottom. Take the water off my brush again, and then I'm just using a fairly dry brush, almost no water on it, to just blend that in a bit. And the same on this side. Okay, I'm going to let that dry again. Very quickly. And I'm going to come back in with some pink to just define the top of that petal there. And this one here. And there's another one kind of there. And another one kind of here. And then I'm going to just with a very damp brush. Again, I'm not pulling down because the pink will come down too strong. I'm pushing up to blend that in. So you see, the important thing is not whether the colour's exact, it's just keeping the right areas of light and dark, so you get the sense that this is something going around, something three-dimensional, not flat, and that these are kind of overlapping each other. And again, you can dry. So you can build this up in lots of different layers until you get exactly what you want. And if you look closely at the wood, you'll see at the very tip, it goes ever so slightly purpley. So I'm just going to add a little bit of very pale purple, just right at the top. And then again, almost no colour. Bring it back in. This test paper isn't the best quality. You can see as I'm painting with it, it's getting little bubbles on the surface. When you're using good quality paper, that's less likely to happen. And you can kind of push the paint around. While it's still wet, you can push it around to go where you want it to go. And get the effect that you want to have. Okay. And again, I'm not trying here to do a photograph. It's my representation. Okay. And then the stem is a much darker green. And when I'm trying to create darker colours, again, I try to avoid using black. So here I'm going to mix some green and a little bit of blue, darker blue, to make that green deeper. And then I'm going to come in and come down for the... Now, the trick with doing stems is not to press too hard with the brush. This one has a nice fine tip. So I'm hardly pressing at all to get a nice thin line. And then if I want to just make a little bit deeper so it looks three-dimensional, I've added a little bit of Payne's grey. Down this side with the very tip of my brush, hardly touching it at all. Try and keep one smooth line. And then you'll get this slightly three-dimensional look in your stem as well. Okay? So that's one method for doing your bud. That's the wet on wet. And then we can also do the wet on dry. How are we doing for time? 3 o'clock, we've got an hour. Okay, good. Okay, so this time, new brush, Julia, before you touch the paint. I'm just going to literally paint it with my brush. So I'm going to use the very tip. I'm going to clean my hands so I don't get any more rubbish on the paper. It is a good idea if you're doing a big piece of work, by the way, to... When I'm trying to do a finished piece, I always work from top left down, so that as I'm working downwards, I can keep a piece of paper, like this greaseproof paper, under my hand. It stops you transferring anything onto the sheet, and it also stops the grease from getting on there. So if you're doing a big piece, that's a useful tip. Okay. But for today, I'm just doing the demo, so okay. So here, I'm literally just using the very top of the brush, and I'm just painting in the, and this is what I mean by you don't always have to trace. You can just, you know, if you feel confident enough, just do the shape that you want and get the green. And down here. Green. And then I, again, clean my brush off, got very little paint on there, just using that as a marking where the edge is. And take that out a bit in the middle because I don't want it to. So I've just kind of painted in an outline, if you like. You see here? And then I'm going to dry it off. And paint the colour in a bit more carefully now. I'm going to use this nice red. I like this pinky red. I'm just doing the top, the birds which have the most colour. I've got a slight overlap there. This is where cotton wool bud comes in handy, because I just want to take some of the colour out of that petal that's slightly behind. Put more depth of pink down that side. And then again, hardly anything on my paintbrush, just water and blending it in. And just there, I'm just going to do a little bit, just completely white as a kind of a highlight. And again, okay, a bit more green. And just working in the detail around the bottom here. Overlaps the other one. And again, I'm going to just blend that green in. Okay. And I can guarantee you, every time I do a lotus, even if I use the same methodology, it will look different. And that, to me, is, it's really just part of the joy of not quite knowing exactly what's going to happen. Pushing in a bit of more bluey green there to contrast. Okay, and then again we can do the stem coming down. Leave my brush to be a bit more wet. This time I'm going to add a bit of brighter green. I'm just going over that with a bit of okay, so that's my bird done wet on dry. Any questions before we go any further? No? No questions? Okay, so we'll move on to the leaves. Just get soft. I'll just put those two side by side so you can see they are quite different. The two different methods. Okay, you get a different look. If you want it to look softer, peachier, then what you can do is add a little bit of white or cream. So I've got this nice creamy ready mixed colour, but you can use white and a tiny, tiny touch of yellow. I'm going to clean my brush first. Get it quite watery. And then you can just use that to blend. And what it will do, it knocks the colour back a little bit. Gives it a slightly more peachy, velvety look, but it's less transparent. Excuse me. So I hope you can see that it's made it a little bit more velvety, creamy looking. So that's the technique we can use. And I found that technique quite useful for the bottom petals, which are kind of more pinky. Drink. Okay, so very quickly then onto the leaves. And I've just pulled out pictures of a couple. So I'm going to just do this, do a big leaf that's just this one on the bottom picture, I think we'll do. Okay, so again, wet on wet technique, just starting with some water. Just going to make a rough leafy shape. And I'm going to use this kind of emeraldy green colour, because this is quite a bluey green. So in terms of greens and colours, so you've got yellowy greens, which look warmer. So if you see the one behind the big leaf, that's a more of a yellowy green. And then the leaf in front is much more bluey green. So this emerald is quite a nice bluey green. You can take your green and add a bit of blue if you don't have exactly the right colour. And again, I'm just going to start with a very light wash. And I'm just going to drop in the paint, and I'm just going to let it follow the lines and go where it needs to go. Sort of, it's a lily leaf shape, lotus leaf shape. It's a fairly uniform colour for the base, and then I'm going to dry that a little bit, not totally. So this is still damp but not runny. And then I'm going to go with a slightly deeper bluey green, because the we've got in the middle, we've got kind of a circle, a lighter circle. We want to leave that. And then we've got kind of veins running up. And you'll see this leaf, it's kind of the edge turns down a bit. I'm just going to put the deeper bits in. With a sense of some depth in. I'm going to want this to kind of blend in a little bit. I don't want the middle to be too dark, so I'm just going to use my cotton wool bud and take out the colour in the middle. I want that to stay light. So again, I'm just going to dry that a little bit, not totally. And then with my next layer, get it a little bit deeper green again, a bit more blue in the green. And I've got some darker shades going on kind of here and here. The thing to remember is nature isn't perfect. You know, it's very, very unusual to find an absolutely perfect leaf that doesn't have any tears, holes, or discoloration in it. So, you know, feel free to experiment a little bit. And then this left-hand side of the leaf is much more of a yellowy green. It's got a touch more yellow in it. So I'm just going to mix a little bit of yellow in. And just drop that in. And I want it to just kind of blend. And again, I would say here, I am not trying to paint a photograph. I'm trying to get the sense of something that looks like a lotus leaf. I'm just going back into these edges with a bit of deeper colour, a bit more pigment to get the sense that it's a little bit frilly on that edge. We want it to be a bit darker in the middle, so it's got a kind of 3D effect. Okay, so that's one of my leaves. And then we'll have a go with the other technique. You can see I'm very messy. Now, obviously, when you come to do your actual thing, it's probably going to be a bit bigger, so you can be a bit freer with your movements. So what I'm trying to do is just take you through each technique for each section of the flower. and then you can go away in your own time to do the final one. Okay. So let's do a different leaf. I'm going to do this. Yeah, so on the top right hand one, it's the image, the leaf furthest to the right. I'm going to do that one. And then I'm going to start again with a palish bluey green, very watery. Okay, so this leaf is a little bit different. It's kind of coming down here. We've got a little fold. We can see some of it underneath, and then it's coming down the front here. We've got the top edge there, and then we've got the back bit of the leaf is coming down there, and it's sort of coming off the edge of my page, but never mind. Okay. So what we want to do is we want to get the deeper colour in here, and the sense of a kind of a lighter ridge at the top. So I'm just going to, and we've got the ridges of the leaf that are kind of curling around that way. I would say 90% of drawing is observation, actually. It's looking. You should be spending twice as much time looking at your subject as you are doing the painting. So let's push some citrus water. Almost dry brush. Just pushing it into those ridges there. And I'm using the paintbrush to kind of push the colour to strengthen the lines in the direction that I want them to go. Like that. So following, so as I was saying before, following in the direction that you want the eye to follow to give the sense of three-dimensionality. Push your paint strokes that way as well. And down here becoming more like this. And then I'm going to go for slightly deeper green. And on the edge here, it's kind of discoloured a little bit. And back to a bit of my paler green. And working it downwards. Clean my brush. I'm going to leave a tiny bit of white at the top here. I don't want to go right to the top with my colour because I want to get the feeling that there's a bit of light shining on the top ridge there. And a little bit of white. Everybody's so quiet. No questions. Have I still got an audience? If any of you suffer from stress or anxiety or have a day when you just like everything feels wrong, pick up some paint and paintbrushes. It's the closest thing that I can get to meditation. I'm hopeless at meditation. But when I've got paintbrush and some paint in my hand and the paper in front of me, it's almost like meditation because I'm totally lost in the paper and the paint, and absolutely nothing else is in my mind at that point in time except getting what I want down on the paper.
I'm doing my work. You want to see it?
Yes, please, show.
Oh, wait. Oh, and I need to turn off.
Oh, looking very good.
Oh, thank you.
Very good. Yeah. I like the
This
way you've got the yellows and the greens, and your petals are looking really three-dimensional, and you've blended the colours really nicely on that left-hand side leaf. Excellent. Keep going.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is the first time I drawing this kind of flower, so yeah, I kind of struggling with it.
Okay, well, make sure you put it up at the end because you've got a little competition. And I expect yours to be better than mine, because for me that's a sign of a good teacher, is when the students do better than you do. Now I'm going to take a slightly deeper colour, a deeper bluey green. This one. Let's put a little bit in. Again, I just want to emphasise the 3D of these leaves. And again, I'm working from the top of the leaf into the colour, so I get a good gradation. I can leave some white colour in there. A bit darker around some of these bottom edges. Intense. And then we've got a very dark bit. So I'm going to add a little bit of Payne's grey. So I get a very deep blue green. And again, just test your colour. And we'll pop that into there. And this will be quite dark. So the darker your colours are, the more they'll recede. Cool colours recede, warm colours come forward. So that's a good thing to remember. And again, when you're trying to get a sense of different dimensions in your work. I'm just going to, I want this to kind of out a bit. Just putting a lot of water in there. And again, I'm going to use a cotton rubber just to lighten that very top edge. I want it to get the feeling that there's a bit of light hitting there. Right, so another way of doing the leaf with wet on dry. Right? And again, you can go over this. I could add in a little bit of maybe a bit of purpley colour down here. Get that contrast of those darker bits. But again, even though some of this is quite dark, I would not use black. Black will fill it dead. So if we add some depth, add a dark blue. Okay. Right, and finally, we're going to have a go at the seed pod, which is possibly the most challenging. So if you're not confident, just do lots of little tests like this on scrap paper before you go to your finished piece, and just, you know, test things out, make your mistakes on little scraps of paper before you go to the big deal, so to speak. Okay, so now we're going to go to the seed pod. This is a lovely photograph that I got from Unsplash by a gentleman called Alan Perper, so just give him a shout out. Okay, so this one I'm just going to do the wet on dry technique because it's got quite a lot of detail and we want to get that detail in. So I'm just going to paint in my outline. And again, this is a demo, so I'm not going to be too particular about total accuracy. Okay. And then just very lightly, I'm going to put in roughly where these little pods are. Maybe even paler. Again, I'm not being totally accurate in this because we haven't got a huge amount of time. Now, the trick here is we want to get the sense that these little pod things pop up, that they're very three-dimensional. Kind of sort of link into one another. So I'm just using very, very, very pale watery paint at the moment to just kind of rough out where I want to have my pods happening. Okay. Now, what you need to notice here is that the top end of the seed pod is in quite a lot of light. The bottom is darker. So we want to try and get that sense. And also the depth in the of the little individual pods where we've got the seeds. We want those to feel like they're going inwards. So first of all, I'm going to use a little bit of purpley blue. Right. And very watery. Again, because I want to just mark in where we're going to have the little seeds. And again, just laying down the first colours, working out. Can't see all of each of them. All sitting in pods here. Some you can barely see at all because they're quite prominent. I'm just using this at the moment like a placeholder where I don't want to go over with the colour. So at the moment, very, very lightly sketched out, but you can see it starting to come together. Now I'm going to take a slightly deeper I want a kind of a yellowy green for this, with a little bit of brown. So I've got some a little bit of raw umber in my paint palette, so use a little bit of that. It's just it, yeah. So that's giving me a kind of a greeny brown, which is what I want. So I'm going to then work out the inside of each of these. Okay. Sort of like things. Using this darker green down the bottom here. As I get to the top, I'm going to make it a bit paler. This is kind of more in the light. And this one is very much about building up in layers. Now, got my emeraldy green again. Working the green slightly above the brown. Now we want to leave a little bit of a light ridge kind of at the top of each one of these. I'm going to use a bit more of this kind of limey green colour. Mix it a little bit with my bluey green. And then I'm going to start working out the outside edges where they go. Kind of dips and valleys in between. Kind of where one stops and the other one starts. And I'm deliberately leaving some little bits white, or almost white, if you want that 3D kind of look. I'm going to dry that. I'm going to make my colour a bit deeper again. And then work in another layer. I'm going to work out where the darker shadows are happening. Where the light's coming. And then we want to get a sense of the, if you look very closely, it's almost like there's little lines. They're like little volcanoes. So I'm just going to use a very, very fine point of my brush and hardly any water. And I'm just going to drag the colour from the outside in towards the top of it. I'm just kind of blending it, but the way that I'm blending it is trying to keep the texture that's in the flower. And particularly around the edges, it's almost ridge-like. Just blending in. And now I'm going to start getting a bit deeper on the outside edges where there's so I'm taking that greeny brown that I did earlier, I'm adding a bit of blue. I'm just trying to indicate these darker bits. Got some kind of changes colour and goes more to a brown down around the edges. blending a little bit. And again, using the brush strokes to try and create the texture that we want, this kind of ribby look that's going on around the outside. Then I want some very, very pale green, very bright green. So I'm going to add a bit of yellow. Fit in with a little bit of this bluey green. I'm just going to use this to give it a little bit of a pop. I'm not going right to the top edge. I'm trying to keep some of the lighter colour. How's everybody else doing out there? Now I'm just using a brush and water. I'm just blending a little bit. And then we're going to go in and make the insides of the pods deeper. I'm going to start with the seedy bits. So they've got lighter and darker areas. At the top here. And you notice I'm not filling them in all the way. So now, again, I'm just going to blend that colour a bit. So I want these to feel three-dimensional, not flat. You've got little bits of light shining on them. And again here I'm just using the brush with water and just the very tip of the brush. And now we want to go in with a much deeper brownish colour. That's great. Too much. Put it under. Test my colour again. Yeah, that's more like it. Okay, and now I'm going to go back into those interiors of the pods to make them a bit darker and get more the sense of the depth and the 3D. And being careful to leave paler ridge at the top. Because we absolutely want to keep the sense that those top bits are popping out. And you'll see I'm only taking this, I'm not taking it all the way round, because we can't see, most of them we can't see straight in, because they're at a slight angle. And I'm going to use a little bit of this brown again to make this bottom edge darker. Let's put it here. And over this side we have a little bit of poppier green. Make that stand out a bit more. And just go in again a little bit more into the grooves between, so it really looks like it's standing out. Now, I'm going to use a bit of white because I want this to pop a little bit more. I'll put these sections here. A bit more. Let me just dry it first. You can see that a hairdryer is very useful. Okay. Now, I can use that Chinese white. Or I really like this. This is a white ink, and I find it's a little bit more opaque than just a white watercolor paint. A little bit dried up, so I'm just going to soften it up a bit. What happens when you leave the lid off things? It's dry. But like most things, it put a little bit of water, which can reconstitute it. You can see it's a really nice opaque white colour. So we can just add a bit of light back in where we want it. And if you want to get it really white, you probably need several coats, which is why it's always better to try and leave the white where you want it in the first place. And try and put it in again afterwards. And again, I'm just using this to add back in a little bit of texture around these edges so they look like they're catching the light a bit. A little bit of slightly brighter purple. I'm going to take a little bit of a liberty with these and make them a bit more purple than they are. Right. A little bit more shadow in a couple of places. Again, because I just want to try and get this really, make them look as if they're popping upwards. Increase the contrast a little bit in a couple of places. And just some very dark. Right in the centre of the deepest ones. I'm working on a very small scale here. Most of my images I like to work a bit larger. So kind of getting there, not perfect. I'll probably work a bit more into it later when it dries off completely. But I think you can see we're starting to get that sense of it popping out. Okay. Right, so that's all the individual constituent bits. So if we can just move to the next slide. Okay, so what I'd like you to do, you can either use my template or you can use your own image and to put all these bits together to make a lotus painting. And if you can hashtag it, hashtag VFCD21 or hashtag TO_morrow. We will collect them all together and we'll have a look, and there'll be some little RMIT gifts for the best ones. It doesn't mean the most lifelike looking ones. I want to see your interpretation. Someone wants to join the call. Okay. If you want to see some more of my work, the link to my Instagram is in the PowerPoint. I've put the link there for Unsplash, which is the reference for photographs. If you do use pictures from there, please attribute the artist, the photographer. It's very important. That's part of the deal. Domestika is a site I use quite a lot for little short courses in different skill sets with different artists. The videos are in Spanish, but they do have subtitles. And I always find them interesting because people talk about their inspiration for their work as well, and it introduces you to new artists and new areas to look for inspiration. Etcher Studio sells the beautiful sketchbooks, but they also have like mini workshops, tutorials. They're very reasonably priced, about $6 if you want to join one. They're usually at some ungodly hour of the night, so I usually pay and then watch the recording. And then I've put some of my favorite floral artists here. These are people whose work just catches my eye and inspires me. Most of them are contemporary, apart from Marion North, who was a Victorian botanical artist. Yeah, just check those out and have a look at their work. It's pretty inspiring. So thank you for joining us today. I hope that you got something out of it. There is other activities, obviously, for the rest of the festival that you can join in with. Loads of stuff going on. So the link is there in the chat. And the link to submit your work is there as well. And yeah, any questions before we go?
Julia, what about we can invite the participant to turn on their webcam and show you your work?
If you've done some work, yeah, please, love to see it. If you've been painting along, yeah.
Okay, everyone, don't be scared. We don't just on like the work is good or bad, but we really would like to see what you have been going through with us today. And if any if any of you like are not really confident with the English one, just feel free to show and say something in Vietnamese. We can translate it for Julia. So, yeah, I see Lee. She's turning on her camera.
Hi, Lee. Let's have a look what you've done.
Yeah, she's a very outstanding one.
I didn't finish the seed one, but yeah, I show you about the flower and the leaf.
Oh, beautiful.
Thank
Very
you.
good. Excellent. Yeah, lovely.
Yeah.
Very nice. Make sure
Please,
you put that one up. Yeah.
Yeah. Please take a photo of when you finish the work and upload it on Facebook or on Instagram and hashtag us so that we can find your post.
Oh, can you
Yeah.
the back on the text box?
Excuse me.
Oh, I didn't remember.
Oh yeah, sure. Okay, we can I will just copy and paste the instruction into the chat box for you. But or maybe easier for you that we also put a link to submit your work into the chat box, so you can just submit the photo of your work through that link will be fine. Any other one that want to show the work? Like, are you guys happy if I call your name like Quỳnh Nguyễn? Quỳnh ơi.
Oh, somebody said not sent messages.
Okay, Quỳnh. Are you able to turn on your camera and show your work quickly with Julia and other ones? Hello, Quỳnh. Oh, I see. Yeah, okay. So no worry, like anytime when you finish the work, you can just simply take the photo and share with us through the submission form, okay? Okay, cool. Thank you, Quỳnh. All right. Oh, maybe if you already submitted. I see there's another one named Hưng. He submitted the work, so maybe I will just share from the screen for you. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, just wait a minute. Okay, can you see it now?
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, it's like a completely one, right? He's very creative.
Very ethereal. Yeah.
Oh,
lovely.
yeah. All right. Oh, I see two more here. So this is from Lee.
Very good.
Yeah.
Especially like the leaves on that one.
Yeah, she make like her own style with this one.
Mm-hmm.
Oh. Another one. Yeah, this one from Quỳnh, I believe. It's a little bit upside down, but yeah.
That's very nice. We can spin that one round. Yeah.
We can see like everyone, they have their own way to be creative, right?
Yeah, I mean that's the beauty of painting is, you know, you just take it and you interpret it the way that you want to. There's no right way, there's no wrong way. It's what works for you.
Yeah.
I like the colors in that one.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Any other ones? If you finish the work, you can just simply put it through my submission form.
Okay. But if not, when are we going to close this, Leanne? Say Tuesday evening, give people enough time to...
I think I can just simply put the call here, like maybe another 5-10 minutes if you guys want, so that you have more time to finish the work and then submit it through the link. Is this okay for everyone?
Yeah, we'll do the judging on Wednesday morning so that people have time to finish.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
All right. So hopefully everyone already have a good experience, some good relaxing time on Sunday afternoon. Yeah, the
Well,
workshop is.
I had a great time. I'm feeling very relaxed now. So thank you everybody for joining me. I'll just put my face back on. Okay. Thank you for joining me. And yeah, if I'm doing any other workshop sessions, then keep an eye on our Facebook page. I'll let people know. I do these from time to time, just because I enjoy it.
Okay, cool.
All right. I look forward to seeing all the other pieces of work. And when I finish mine, I'll post it as well. But I'm not sure if I'm going to get it finished this week because I've got a lot of work to do.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Thank you, Julia.
Take care, everybody. Yeah, and check out my Instagram if you want to see some of my other work, my acrylics, and I do quite a lot of cats and dogs. If anybody likes animals. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Sure.
Okay.
All right.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Julia. Thank you.
Bye.